Welcome to the section of this course, Planning for Instruction, Putting the Pieces Together. This section will attempt to shed light on how to piece together all the planning resources Fort Worth ISD has to offer for elementary mathematics, including the Fort Worth ISD Instructional Framework, the Fort Worth ISD Online Curriculum page, and the Fort Worth ISD Adopted Math Curriculum Resource, or Go Stepping Stones. The objectives for this section of the course are: teachers will learn the important components to the planning portion of a lesson using the Fort Worth ISD Instructional Framework, learn the important components of the lesson structure included in the Fort Worth ISD Instructional Framework, and watch a model lesson that follows the Fort Worth ISD Instructional Model. The image presented on the screen is the Fort Worth ISD Instructional Model that has been adopted for the 2020-2021 school year. The framework starts with the student at the center of the compass, encircled by the learning outcomes, learner profile, and culture. The intent is that teachers provide learner-centered instruction to help build the learner profile throughout their K-12 experience in order to achieve the learner outcomes that they will need to be successful in post-secondary work. To build the learner profile, we must provide a culture in our schools and classrooms that fosters a safe environment for students to excel and achieve at high levels. The outer part of the graphic shows 4 actions: plan, instruct, assess, and reflect that encase the learner. These actions provide for the effective, culturally responsive, linguistically accommodating Tier 1 instruction. With the student at the center in mind, it is also important to consider the responsibility of the teacher to ensure that the instruction they are receiving is aligned to the curriculum being utilized and the assessments they are to be given. Careful planning is necessary to ensure this alignment. For the purpose of this course, we will be highlighting the planning phase of the Fort Worth ISD instructional model and taking a deeper look at the actions and components that are necessary to successfully plan a high-quality Tier 1 instruction lesson. The 3 main components that go into planning a high-quality lesson include standards alignment, lesson design, and instructional strategies. The following slides will dive into each one of these components deeper. The first component that needs to be considered is ensuring teachers have a deeper understanding of the standards they are about to teach. Standards need to be unpacked and deconstructed. Assessment items related to the standard need to be analyzed and created to write clearly defined learning objectives. If you're unfamiliar how to deconstruct or unpack a standard, we will practice this more in the last activity in this section of the course. The second component that needs to be considered is the lesson design. Fort Worth ISD has included a 6-part lesson structure that is embedded in the instructional model. The great thing about this lesson structure is that it is very familiar to the structure that many teachers have previously been using, following the gradual release model: I do, we do, you do. The Fort Worth ISD lesson structure also provides descriptions of the parts of the lesson, similar to what you may be used to, and estimated percentages of the time that teachers should be spending in each phase of the lesson, including standards-based alignment, which should occur prior to the lesson as we previously discussed, activation of learning, which some may relate to the engage piece, modeling, some might call this I do, interactive practice, other known as we do, practice independent of the teacher, or you do, and the typical closure. As we begin to look more closely at each component of the lesson structure, a resource that you might find beneficial can be found in this section of this course titled Guide for Planning a Lesson. This document goes into specifics on where to locate any information mentioned in the Fort Worth ISD lesson structure that is provided by Fort Worth ISD. For example, this document includes where to find the scope and sequence and how to utilize it, where to find the TEKS to be taught in a specific unit, or where to find sample released STAR items, and lastly, where to find specific suggested resources by the Fort Worth ISD Math Department. This document will also bring everything together in one document to print out for aid in future planning use. The first phase of planning, standards alignment, and the first stage of the lesson structure, standard-based learning target, go hand in hand. Like previously stated, deconstructing or breaking down the standard and analyzing assessment forms of the standard all need to be done prior to actually planning out the lesson. Although this stage is not necessarily a part of the lesson that is presented to the students, this stage is still crucial to deepening a teacher's understanding of the standards and planning a targeted objective for the lesson, aligned to the DOL or assessment. For a more specific example of this, visit the Planning a Lesson Planning Guide section of this course. The next stage of the lesson structure includes activation of learning. You may relate this stage to the typical engage stage of a lesson, where teachers activate prior knowledge and activate the student's interest in the lesson. Origo identifies this particular stage as step 2, starting the lesson, where teachers review previously learned content and/or offers recommendations for launching or introducing the lesson to the students. This stage should take roughly 10% of the allotted time of the math lesson. The next stage of the lesson structure includes modeling the lesson. You may relate this stage to the typical gradual release model as the I do component of the lesson. Origo identifies this particular stage as step 3, teaching the lesson, where teachers model think-alouds, provide visuals, and/or break apart the concept or skills into learnable parts or process steps. Planning for this stage requires careful thought of working toward the end in mind and ensuring that the wording for the think-alouds and planning out how to break apart the concept into learnable parts or steps lead toward mastery of the objective and success on the end product. This stage should take roughly 25% of the allotted time for the math lesson. The next stage of the lesson structure includes providing interactive practice for the lesson. You may relate this stage to the typical gradual release model step of the we do component of the lesson. Origo identifies this particular stage as the step in portion of the lesson, where both the teacher and the students interact in the lesson by shared practice of the skill and by answering posed questions in cooperative pairs or groups. Planning for this stage requires careful thought of working towards the end in mind and ensuring that scaffolded question prompts and scaffolded examples are aligned to the objective and are aligned to the end product. This stage should take roughly 25% of the allotted time for the math lesson. The next stage of the lesson structure includes providing independent practice for the lesson. You may relate this stage to the typical gradual release step of the I do component of the lesson. Origo identifies this particular stage as the step up portion of the lesson, where students are provided work to complete individually, building off examples in the step-in discussion. Planning for this stage requires careful thought of working towards the end in mind. Although Origo offers independent practice, problems may need to be modified, or additional problems may need to be provided and formatted differently to better align to the objective and to the end product. This stage should take roughly 25% of the allotted time for the math lesson. The next stage of the lesson structure includes providing closure for the lesson and also a formative assessment. Origo identifies this particular stage as step 4, reflecting on the work, where students are provided discussion questions to reflect on what they learned and understood from the lesson. Planning for this stage requires careful thought of coming up with or ensuring that reflection questions are aligned to the lesson and objective. Potential Origo formative assessments that may be used, if aligned to the objective and lesson, can be found in the Assessment tab in the current module. Teachers may also choose to create formative assessments on their own, but as stated before, this should be done at the very beginning stages of planning to ensure step 2 through 5 are aligned. This stage should take roughly 15% of the allotted time for the math lesson. Moving away from the lesson structure and back to the Fort Worth ISD instructional framework, the last phase of planning includes planning for instructional strategies. Instructional strategies should be research-based and include the best practices of teaching mathematics, including providing time for students to read, write, and collaborate. An important component of choosing instructional strategies is to ensure instruction is culturally responsive. Teachers should ensure that students' differences and unique strengths of each child are celebrated to encourage academic achievement and sense of belonging in the classroom. To learn more about building a culturally responsive classroom, a section of this course will be dedicated to this topic and required for completion of this course. Lastly, instructional strategies should use differentiated strategies to meet the needs of all learners, including our EL students and our students with IEPs, to ensure all students' success. For differentiation ideas, if aligned to the objective and lesson, Origo provides potential differentiation strategies in the Differentiation tab. For further learning on differentiation, a separate section of this course will be dedicated to the topic and required for completion of this course. For successful completion of this section of the course, view the additional support documents, guide for planning a lesson, and complete the TEKS deconstruct and practice assignment.